Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I want to show you a real use application for Beat Detective when tracking drums. Before we go into a moral, ethical argument about Beat Detective, let me just say I truly don't care. If you want to use it, awesome. If you don't want to use it, awesome. If you got something to say about it, please, oh my God, go anywhere else. Okay, with that being said, let's get started. So Beat Detective, in a nutshell, is a Pro Tools tool. It's a rhythmic analysis tool that can essentially chop up your audio file based on your parameters that you've set and then set it to a specific grid. When do I use Beat Detective? I'll typically use it when I've got a song that's got a lot of MIDI programming, like MIDI percussion, MIDI drums, samples, anything that has been placed directly on the grid that I have to play on top of to make sure that it doesn't flam or it doesn't sound completely out of time. Part of the benefits to Beat Detective is just precision editing. It can go through, it can analyze your file, tell you where all of the transients are, and then you can chop it up and conform it. It's a time saver. So let's say you're working on a demo, you got to get files out the door and you didn't have time to play it perfectly. You can use this. That's something I don't recommend doing, but whatever you want. Some of the cons are the artifacts that can be introduced when editing. So let's say you've got a ring in your snare and you chop it up and you cut the tail, but you put a fade on it. You can still hear some of those artifacts in there. So you have to be very careful, very diligent with how you use Beat Detective. Another con is over-reliance. So while it's a time saver, you can also become over-reliant on it and then just start using it when you don't even need to use it. It's also like a giant calculator. So whatever you put into it and tell it to do, it's going to come up with an answer based on what you have input. So if you input the wrong things, it'll give you a completely messed up version of what you wanted. And because of that, you'll have to deal with how it can potentially misinterpret what you're telling it to do. So it's a very finicky tool, still very useful, but you've got to know how to use it before you begin. So with that, let's go ahead and open it up and I can show you how I use it. I've got a track that was sent to me and it is country pop song, but it's got a lot of percussion programming in it. So it's got a MIDI loop that has obviously been quantized and it includes kicks and snares. So because of that, I want to make sure that when my kicks and snares come in and they have to play on top of each other, that they're perfectly in line and that there's no flamming, no weird time alignment issues. So let's go ahead and listen to the percussion track. It's got a lot going on in it. So let's open up Beat Detective and walk through some of its parameters. To do that, you can go to Event and then Beat Detective, or you can use Command Numpad 8. So right here on the left-hand side under Operation, I typically don't use beat marker generation or groove template extraction. I just use clip separation, clip conform, and edit smoothing. Clip separation is essentially just that. It's chopping up the clips that you tell it to. Clip conform is now telling it to conform the clips that you've just chopped up onto a specific grid. Edit smoothing is for gluing the clips back together so that way it sounds like one flowing natural clip. Under selection, you're just telling it when to start analyzing and when to stop analyzing. For contains, it's just a drop-down folder of different note subdivisions. So if you're only playing quarter notes, you can use that. If you're playing a mixture of eighth note and quarter notes, use eighth note. If you're playing a mixture of sixteenths, eighths, quarters, use sixteenths. It's also got this triplet feature. So if you've got triplet notes happening, or you're playing a 6/8 or 12/8 track or something that swings or whatever, I know triplets don't equal swing, but if that's what you're doing, you can use that to make sure you're telling Beat Detective that, hey, you can analyze all these notes, but know that some of these are triplets, so that way it doesn't try and take your eighth note triplet and put it as a 16th note or something. Under that, you've got capture selection. If you highlight the clip, it'll just automatically figure out the start and the ending of it. On the right side, you've got detection. I leave it at normal. You've got analysis. I leave it at enhanced resolution. You've got analyze. Once you've selected the clip, you've captured it, then you'll analyze it, and Beat Detective will figure out where all the transients are. Underneath that, you've got sensitivity. Go all the way up to 100%, and it'll analyze every single note. If you really just want the big beats, I keep it down at 25%. Resolution, you can have bars, beats, or sub beats. So you're essentially just saying like, hey, if you're on sub beats, look in between all of the bars. There's different notes that I've played in there, and that's what I want you to analyze. If you just want big beats, select beats. If you just want bars to chop up bars, use bars. The trigger pad is really just the amount of space before the transient that it has chopped up. Because if you don't have any trigger pad, it'll slice it right at the top of the transient, and sometimes the beginning of the transient might get cut off and then it'll sound clipped, won't sound good. So to use Beat Detective, I really just like to analyze the kick and the snare. And that's because I just want to focus on the big beats. I don't want it to pick up any of my ghost notes. I don't want it to pick up my hi-hat or any of my fills, because I want that to sound as natural and as human as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ungroup the drums, and then I'm just going to select the kick, and I'm going to select the V7 of my snare drum. I'm going to click capture, and it's going to tell me start bar 41, end bar 73. We can verify that here at the top, see what's highlighted. And now we're going to click Analyze. Okay, so now it's analyzed all of my transients. Notice how it hasn't picked up any of the ghost notes, none of the hi-hat, none of the tom fills. Now, if you want it to pick up more, you can adjust the sensitivity. But I really liked it at 25% where it wasn't getting too much. Before I separate, I need to make sure that I have all of the tracks in my group reselected and re-highlighted. Now, when I do this, it's going to keep the analysis of only the kick and snare, even though I have everything else highlighted. So now I've got everything highlighted. I can go ahead and separate. And now we've got all of these individual clips. Now we're going to go down here to clip conform. What we've got here is the strength, and that is just how closely to the grid do you want your clips moved. So for me, because I have all of this percussion programming that's on the grid, I want it to be pretty tight, pretty close, but I don't want it to be 100% and make it super robotic. Granted, we're only working with the big beats of the kick and the snare, so it's not really going to affect the feel of my hi-hat or my fills or my ghost notes or anything like that. If you really just wanted to move things a little bit, you could go down to 25%, but I like this 75% range. Below that, you've got exclude within. So if you have this to 50% and you can say exclude within 10%, what that means is if you were within 10% of where you want that clip to be placed, it won't move it. That way it can maintain some of your natural feel. Swing, that's for literally if you're swinging, if you're using that triplet feature, you can tell it if you want an 8th note swing or 16th note swing, and then you can determine the strength. It goes all the way from 0 to 150, so you can get an ultra tight swing. But for now, we're just straight 16ths, so I'm going to go ahead and conform. And it's got all of these clips now conformed. So as you can see here, there's a little bit of space between some of these clips. So I need to highlight, and then I'm going to go to Edit Smoothing, and then I'm going to fill and crossfade. So if I just fill, it's just going to make sure that all of the gaps are closed, but it's not going to crossfade. So you might hear some clicks and pops, but you'll want it to crossfade. My ideal crossfade length is about 8 milliseconds. I feel that that makes the drums sound the most natural. So now that we've smoothed, we're completely done with Beat Detective. I'm going to A-B the track so you can hear how the pocketed or time-aligned or gridded drums sound with the percussion and compare that to my original take without it being time aligned. So here's just the percussion and the drums. And now here they are with no time aligning. So not bad, but there's just a few little notes in there that I can hear kind of flam with the snare sometimes. Not by much, but if this is a record that's being put out, I want my best work done on this. So that little bit of extra help from Beat Detective can really make this sit perfectly with the programmed percussion. Okay, great. I think that sounds really good. I think it sounds natural. What I would recommend is making sure that you listen to it with the drums soloed as well to make sure you're not hearing any funky artifacts. Sometimes if you've got a really ringy snare and it chops up some of the sustain, that'll start to sound unnatural. I like to make sure I use it as a tool and not as a crutch. And for this example, I feel like this is a tool to better the song. Whether or not you want to use it, I still think it's a very important tool to know. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. If you begin using Beat Detective, just know that like any tool in your arsenal, it is how you wield it. Hopefully you've learned something. I appreciate you. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe, do all the YouTube things, help support me so I can keep making videos. All right, I'll see you in the next one.